So 3 things you need to know before you get Skirk. Yeah, there's a couple things that I want to preface. So first is actually going to be a benefit. So this is a benefit of her needing Hydro and Cryo characters, which, it's a benefit and, a hindrance, because you can only use Hydro and Cryo characters, and then it's kind of like, oh, you're losing a lot of damage. It's just not even worth trying to run a Melt team or, a Geo character with those Cryo characters and stuff. You're losing a lot of damage, right? Her passive, from what well, maybe it's not a passive, but the damage that she gains from having full Hydro and Cryo characters, it's very similar to Nevi's passive here, where, let's just assume this is Hydro and Cryo characters, where if you have one character, attacking with their Hydro element, then you get an extra 10%. Then you have 2 characters attacking with their Hydro or Cryo element, then it goes up to 120%. And then, with 3 Cryo or Hydro characters attacking off field or just attacking in general, you'll get up to 160 or 170%, which is good. And that's a lot of damage, and it's really nice, and that's sort of based on I Win to Lose's, damage. I like the way that he, displayed the damage. So that's one thing, right? You're gonna need Hydro and Cryo characters for her. Now, that's obvious. What might not be obvious, though, is Cryo Resonance. A lot of people, this has not been very effective for a very long time, if we're being entirely honest. Only with Miss Coffee recently has this become a thing. And that is, you're gonna basically have, 15% baseline with Skirk. Now, what you should see this as is Skirk only has to get up to 85% crit rate, and then you're good. Whenever I've seen, a couple people say that they have like 90-something% crit rate, and it's like, I hope you're factoring in this, because typically on Skirk's teams, you'll be, attacking opponents affected by Cryo or Frozen, right? You'll be doing one of those two, and you'll get the 15% crit rate, and that'll really, be very nice for you, because honestly, 85% crit rate is not hard to get, especially if you're gonna use a, set like MH, which is, a set that she can use if you have Fiorina, obviously. Now, for probably the biggest thing with Miss Coffee is that she is not a hyper carry character. Miss Coffee and Fiorina do off-field damage, meaning their builds matter for your character. So it's not like Mavuika, where if you're gonna, raise her and get her to like top 1% or whatever, you're not gonna be doing millions of damage just because you got Skirk to top 1%. She will do that much damage, but it's not like Mavuika level where she's doing like 3 million damage in a rotation purely by herself. Skirk is more likely gonna be maybe doing 1.8 million or something like that. I don't know specific numbers, but I would imagine she's gonna do a little bit over 1 million. But the other 2 characters are a reason why her team is going to be so strong, and having these 2 characters on decently good builds is gonna, be impactful towards having, that team overall be strong. Now, we can also talk about this investment level. If you give Skirk her weapon, it's not gonna be as significant as giving Mavuika her weapon, because simply put, Mavuika, hyper carry character, 30% buff is a 30% buff to the entire team's damage, basically. However, with Skirk, with the same amount of pulls, if you get Skirk's weapon, you'll get a 30% increase to Skirk. But don't forget that Fiorina and Miss Coffee are a part of that huge damage number. So that 30% really might only lead to like a 10% increase or something like that. I'm not going to say that's all it's going to lead to, but in terms of the overall team's damage, yeah, it's not going to look as impressive as getting that 30% damage buff on Mavuika. And now we can talk about the third, thing you should know, and that is if you lose one of these really strong characters for her, it can be problematic, right? And more so not talking about Shenhe. Shenhe seems to be the character that you can live without, right? You can live without this character. Even getting Mulan would be a substitute for this character, right? Shenhe we can live without. However, Fiorina and then also Miss Coffee, we're not so easily living without, right? Because, you take away Fiorina and you give Yelan, let's say you put Yelan on the team. Let's say you have Shenhe and Miss Coffee, Fiorina, that's gonna be a pretty decent DPS loss because, Yelan does not do as much damage as Fiorina and does not provide as high of support, right? Fiorina, she can get up to 100%. I mean, we're using Miss Coffee too, so, it's a very effective way of gaining fanfare with her massive, burst heal, right? So you burst heal, then you get a whole bunch of fanfare stacks almost immediately for Skirk, especially if you're doing a burst build, it'll be really nice. Yelan does give 40%, but again, if you're doing a burst build or you're using her in a burst rotation, burst-like rotation, then we're going to be looking at, this damage increase that doesn't really go up. Honestly, I thought this maxed out at 40. It's actually 50. That's kind of crazy. You know, that's good. 50%, that's good, but it's at the end of a rotation, which, you know, that's not gonna really count in her burst. So depending on how you use it, it can be more impactful or less impactful depending on, you know, the fanfare and stuff. So yeah, not great. And then especially if you're gonna lose Miss Coffee, because Miss Coffee is over here and she's gonna be providing 55% res shred. That's insane. That is insane. Legitimate. There's no other way to, you know, say that. It's just insane. And then you have healing, right? So who's your next healer? You know, Kokomi? Are we using Kokomi? You know, I don't think I need to explain that, you know, like, you know, I don't know how much damage. Like, let's just, for the sake of it, 700,000 damage, whatever. Probably able to do that with Miss Coffee, right? I know you can probably do that with Miss Coffee. So 700,000 damage with Miss Coffee. You lose that. You lose the better healing, and then you're stuck with a 48% attack, because assuming that you use Kokomi at the end of a rotation, so that way Skirk can get the Thrilling Tales buff, and then you just go ahead and press your E skill so she can apply Hydro off field. It's not really looking too good. That's a lot less than 55% res shred and 800,000 damage, right? Especially once we realize, 48% attack. Again, Skirk isn't meant to be a hyper carry. It would make a lot more difference if 48% attack was, on the hyper carry. Yeah, I mean, we can go ahead and quickly look at this. 48% attack with Seat Lolly, that's pretty massive from Mevwika. From what I've been told, it's a whole 30% DPS loss for the team. That's just losing Miss Coffee. From what I've been told, I don't know specific numbers. Again, I'll see when it comes out, but especially again going back to that level of investment, Skirk would really appreciate this 60% crit damage. So if we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna be like, Miss Coffee, you're gonna lose 60% crit damage, 55% res shred, and like 700,000 to 800,000 damage, that's a lot to lose. This is how insane Miss Coffee is just in general. I mean, we've talked about this countless times, and like how, she saved so many cryo characters. This is the cost of saving all those cryo characters. We have the support character who can support probably the best in the entire game. Her support abilities are like the best support abilities in the entire game, but they're locked behind needing these restrictions, which were good for old characters because the old characters already wanted to use those restrictions, kind of. But when it comes to, here's our new character, Miss Coffee isn't, is like their best teammate, and Miss Coffee doesn't actually, it's not that good, when you move her off of the team, there's some issues, right? I mean, yeah, so if you have a C1 Miss Coffee like I do, you take her off the team, you're gonna feel it. No matter what you do, there is no replacement for this character. This character, genuinely, I said it when she came out, it's just like the best support abilities in the game. There's nothing else. She just has the strongest support abilities in the game. So if you don't have her, expect the overall team damage to be severely lower. And that's just for every single cryo character, to be honest. Like, we already know this. So Skirk isn't going to be any different. And it's kind of what we expected. So yeah, 3 things to look out for before you summon on Skirk. Figured I would make the videos because I don't know. I figured some people would maybe miss a couple of these things. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.